Del Bankole? Is it Del?
Deli.
Deli, okay.
Yes,
thank you, Deli. Clyde DeMonte? Thank you so much, Clyde. Chris Phillips. There you go. Thank you. Dwayne Price? No Dwayne? Darn, okay. And Kim Thornton. Kim, are you still here? There you are. Kwame Adu? Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you. Kwame? No? Okay. And if you know any of these people, we will have these at the front desk. You can send them on up. Sarosh Naeem? Thank you. Rico Rodriguez? Okay, looks like Rico stepped out. Tom Schock. All right. That's right. Stephen LaCourzaire. I don't know that I did that right, Stephen, sorry. Irving Buckstein. Thank you, guys. Bezawit Sumner.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bezawit. Cindy's got two. Thank you. Pat Benoit. Serena Bryson. I hope you guys heard those names. And of course, last but certainly not least, Nish Majmudar. Sorry. I've already announced him once today. You'd think I could do it again. And without further ado, actually, you know what? I'm going to say one thing before we let the panel come up here. I know that there's some people still having some conversations in the back. I just ask up front that you guys be really respectful of these guys. We are so appreciative that they've spent their time to come here and educate and help us out. And so if you do want to have a conversation, that's great. Please take it outside. And now let's just give them a round of applause and thank them for their time.
All right, so I'm not going to waste time in my introduction. I've already done it once, and we got a lot of questions. So I'm going to pass it out to you and all of you guys to introduce yourself. Bez, so please go ahead.
All right, Bezawit Sumner, Chief Information Security Officer at CRISP Shared Services, which is an HIA technology service vendor that supports 6 states and multiple health departments and health systems across the country.
Hi, my name is Cindy Tu. I'm Director of IT and Data Audit with Discover Financial Services. Prior to joining Discover, I've been with Fannie Mae for 3.5 years, but overall I've been in industry for 17 years now, so very glad to be here, and I'm the only audit representation on this panel, so we'll definitely talk about police versus, partner in this relationship with CISO organization, but glad to be here.
Thanks, Cindy. I love auditors. I think the auditors are great. We should give a hand to the auditors out there. They keep us out of trouble. I mean, we should take care of them. I'm Pat Benoit, and I'm most recently was the global CISO at Brinks. Prior to that, I had some time at CBRE running GRC and the BISO program, and deputy CISO here and there, and Experian and Dell Services and so forth. So it's been a whole bunch of big companies. So happy to be here.
Hi, everybody. I'm Serena, Bryson. I'm the current Information Security and Program Manager at CRISP Shared Services with Bez. Prior to that, I was a Director of Security and Compliance at PCI Group.
All right, thank you, guys. I do have to recognize one fact here, that in 25 to 30 years of my professional career, this is the first time I'm seeing female outnumbering male in the IT industry, and this is so good. Thank you. So let's get on with the questions. Cindy, since you're, I'll go with ladies first, and Cindy, I'll pick on you. You're auditor. We'll go with the regulatory compliance question, right? So how can organizations effectively navigate and comply with evolving cybersecurity regulation and standards?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that firstly, I would recommend to stay informed, right? Because it's changing all the time, and that's why you need to make sure that you're subscribing to some of these cybersecurity publications, attend like cybersecurity conference, and maybe like, you know, attend the webinars and stuff to make sure that you update on what's the trend, what's changed. And then next step is to incorporate some of these in your policy procedures, like implement additional controls, right, to make sure you update it. And then make sure that once you get the policy out there, don't forget about training your people, right? Like maybe the stakeholders are not aware of what they're supposed to do. So definitely like training and guidance is definitely needed to make sure that they're aware of what they're supposed to do. So make sure that the company is in compliance, especially for regulatory industry like financial services, healthcare. This is super important, right? Because the cost of not in compliance is reputational damage, regulatory fines, and you know, all the 9 yards. So it's, you know, consequences very high.
No, thank you, Pat.
Yeah, I just add make close friends with your auditors, make close friends with your legal counsel. Those are two big ones to help you stay informed. But I think we're missing the boat in a lot of cases because we go, oh my God, here comes a regulation, here comes something we have to comply with, and we race to just meet the minimum compliance. Instead of taking a step back and saying, what do we need to do to have the best cyber protection, the best data protection that we can have, you know, for the price? We have a balance we have to maintain. And then look for, are there any gaps to compliance? So don't chase compliance, chase a good program, and then look for gaps.
Okay. Serena, you got thoughts on that?
I agree. I think a lot of companies miss the boat when they look at meeting a regulatory compliance as a one-time thing. It's a continuous improvement program. Policies change, governance change. The next best thing changes. That guardrail is constantly moving, especially in cybersecurity and information security. Every time we build a way to block something, there's a new thing that's getting around it. Compliance is no different, so it's got to continuously evolve, and if you don't have a program that evolves with those changes, you're always going to be missing the boat.
Thank you. Bez, anything? All right, so let's move on to then, we talked about regulatory compliance and things that we need to be focused on. One of the things that you all talked about regulatory compliance, but what if when the incident happens, right? An incident, usually most of the companies all our controls are based on compliances, right? So what are the critical elements, and Bez, this time we'll start with you. What are the critical elements of an effective incident response plan, right? And how can organizations ensure swift and coordinated response, right?
First of all, have an incident response plan that addresses your business objective. It's updated annually. You call out roles and responsibilities, individuals that will respond to an incident. In addition to that, ensure it addresses your needs in the time and have a strategic and a tactical components. And in addition to that, you have a plan, updated annually or as needed, and have an incident response exercise annually. One is to ensure your policy and your plan work, but also does the making friends with auditors and legal, right? Do we all know what we're going to do when something happens? Who's going to contact who? Communication, asset, and all of that. And I'll give the rest of the members to address the components. But I think what's important is have the plan, review it at least annually, exercise. And the exercise should not be the repeat of the previous year's ransomware or whatever we see, but make it very real for your environment. Not if you're in Azure environment, if it's an AWS, it's not going to do anything for you as much as you're in Azure. What can you do in your environment to see what you will do, and make sure lessons learned are implemented on a year-to-year basis so that you can have a feedback loop to the things that you've learned. So I would.
Right, no, you talked about a couple of good points. You talked about incident response, problem management, lessons learned, and then other thing you talked about, I'm forgetting, but yeah, tabletop exercises, right?
I was listening to your.
Yeah. But I'd like three of you to a little bit expand on that problem management. Once the incident happened, how do you make sure it's not repeated, or the tabletop exercises, right? Reviewing documentation, so if you guys can.
Yeah, so at a high level, right, for instant response, definitely having the plan in place is really important, having policy procedures. And secondly, like having dedicated instant response team, right? So their job is to make sure that they follow the procedures, and then, having a detection system in place, and then figure out like, hey, after the detection, we know what the instance is, like figure out how do you respond and contain it first and mitigate it. And then figure out like what is the communication protocols for internal, external stakeholders to say, hey, this happened, and give regular update about what's happening. And then eventually you move on to recovery and restore the system to normal, right? And after that is really lessons learned, right? Like how do you do lessons learned to say, hey, how do we execute on this? What can we do better next time? Right? So using that iterative loop and say, hey, get some feedback and iterate, and next time you become better. And in terms of being more swift response, I would say document the plan on the common like instance that like what the step-by-step guide, and do some drills as well to practice, hey, in this scenario, tabletop exercise, right? Or some of the real-time, like real-life drill to make sure that you can actually follow through. If it doesn't work, you can tweak it, right? And then having a clear communication protocol to make sure that, hey, the right people are notified so that they can collaborate, provide information, make decisions.
Yeah, I'd say, so coming from a military background, train the way you expect to fight. So, don't soften the exercise. Hello? Okay. Don't soften the exercise because the executives might get bored or might not like something or whatever the case is. So train the way you fight. The other thing is, being a pilot and flight instructor, I also am very near and dear to the idea of checklists. And so you have emergency checklists, you have normal checklists, and then behind those you have all those pretty words that people like to write in documentation that nobody ever really reads. So that emergency checklist, I usually try and make that a mandate that when you do an incident and you have your instant ticket that's up and stuff, there's a checklist that is there with it for every job that has to have some function within that instant response, so that the person can do what they need to do, but then come back to the checklist and make sure, did I capture everything? Did I do everything I was supposed to do? Otherwise, you're going to miss stuff. So I really believe in checklists.
Nice.
That checklist is a brilliant idea. I'll say and add to that, make sure that you're training all of your responders, not just your first responders. If you have secondary employees or third-level staff that aren't always involved in your incident, you never know who's going to be available or out on a certain day. So make sure that everyone who is responsible for responding to an incident or could be pulled in to respond to an incident all understand your plan.
That's good.
And up too. How many managers and leaders have the capability to fulfill the roles on their teams should they need to? Just asking.
Right. So, one of the in last couple of years, right, the biggest incidents that we've seen is not the organization itself being exposed, but exposed via third parties. So third-party risk has really gone up, and it's because we are so interconnected. We are connected. An organization is so downstream, upstream. We're connected to all kinds of. So, let's start with you, Serena. How do you? What measures can organization take to secure their supply chain cyber threats, right?
First and foremost, you have to understand what your supply chain is. It's not just your initial vendor that you're dealing with. It's every vendor that they're connected to. And here is a completely wrong analogy, but the one that sticks the best is if you think about it like you think about public health as your outbreak monkey. It's every person that's attached to that person who brings a threat to your organization. It's just not the person that you're in a relationship with. It's every person that they're in a relationship with as well. Understanding that your attack surface is not just your third-party vendor, but your fourth parties that are attached to your third-party vendors. Understanding what your individual attack surface is, and not just the tools that IT is using, but what is HR using, what is finance using, what are your sales teams using, your marketing teams, how many websites do you have out there that you don't even know that you have, and do you know what platform they're built on? These are all areas that we don't think about when we first initially think about our attack surface. We think about the main points of entry that we know about when we're actually most vulnerable at those third-party and fourth-party vendors.
Although I agree with you wholeheartedly that you need to be able to go down multi-levels, I also have had the discussion many, many times, and from a legal point of view, we have no relationship with fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh parties. How far does it go and where do you stop? So there's a point at which I don't know how you do that. Now, one of the ideas that I've had over the years and tried, and it kind of works, is depending on the size of your company and depending on what kind of a program you have, you may be able to look at your third-party vendors and say, you know, these are smaller third-party vendors that maybe don't have the resources to run a program like you do. Together a way to extend your services to pick up some of those smaller third parties or potentially smaller customers, you know, not as a primary source of revenue, but hey, we can bring you into our SOC process for incident response, and it's going to cost you just a little bit more because you won't have to build all this out. So it's an incidental revenue, but you know what? Cyber becomes a revenue stream. Even if it's only $1, the way people look at you when you're in that quarterly meeting about where the money came from and it says cybersecurity $1, that's a very different view than cybersecurity is just sucking money down and we never see anything back. So, you know, think about those kinds of outside the box ways to maybe approach that.
Thanks, Pat. Bez, I'd like to, in the same topic, but I'd like you to answer a little bit further up, is what, in the recent times, you know, solar winds and that type of events that we've seen, what lessons have been learned? And how can similar attacks be prevented? So have you guys done anything?
So SolarWinds and Log4j we did have to respond to, but the first one was, Bez, we don't have to worry about it because we stopped using SolarWinds Orion, I think. I always mispronounce it, but which was good. But with Log4j, the realization was, one, it was most likely that we were using the Log4j library, but it's knowing where and the vendor that was running the SaaS or whatever the tool was. So from tying it back to the supply chain, third-party, vendor management, all of it is what was public-facing, who was running it, who's running point, what vendor is responsible, is that vendor going to do anything about it? And if it was a direct vendor, we can go request because our contracts required it. But we had a SaaS tool, not the name, but rather a SaaS tool that we needed to update, but the vendor was not going to release an update. So we had to mitigate by putting in the mitigating controls, right? It's knowing, monitoring, putting in WAF controls or block modes, whatever it was that we can do. So I think part of it is knowing what we have, how we're connected, who those vendors are, points of contacts at those vendors, and as best as we can, what is that kill chain when something happens? I think part of the Illumio's presentation was that, right? Is how do we, when that thing happens, how do we make sure we can limit the damage it can do? So I think we tie it back to the basics. Policies and, you know, audits help us because they say, do you know what you have or, you know, where your data lives? And I will say with the audit and regulation that ties back to third-party control is NIST recently released the HIPAA security rule implementation guide because they realized HIPAA's, you know, you need to do it, but HHS is not coming to say you have to unless you're Change Healthcare and you're about to get audited by them. And so what helps us in that is if we look at the NIST needed to come out and say, we're going to help organizations, at least business associates that have to do security rule, and give strict instructions of what it means to do a risk assessment in your environment. So I think policy, regulation, audit, if we do that, I think maybe I should stop talking.
No. Those are all good.
That's what they do at the Oscars, right?
Instead of just doing like, you know, like you still think like you need to like risk rate these third parties, right? Based
Right.
on, you know, how these vendors are being used in terms of like inherent data security risk, right? Cybersecurity risk, so that you know like which vendor are critical for your organization and how much damage they can do if there's a data breach. Like the most recent example is American Express, this through a third party vendor, right? So doing these assessments, make sure you inventory them, risk rate them, and make sure that you understand and do some cybersecurity like reviews on practice and data security, how they secure that. I think that would be more of a preventative control to prevent something from happening.
Right, and the common theme that I think I'm hearing from all four of you is, at the bottom line, I think there's got to be some collaboration, there's got to be some information sharing, right? So I'm going to ask Pat you this question. How can, looking at TPRM, and not just TPRM, you know, all the other incidents also, how can industry collaboration and information sharing enhance collective cybersecurity defenses, right? Is there a way where a platform where we can share information?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of platforms that we can share information, and just coming to groups like this, we can share information. We can build our own networks to share information. I think we have to be careful, like with many things, that we're not chasing the cool way to find stuff and at the expense of the fundamentals that we overlook. What you brought out is, yes, we need to know our vendors, but how many of us knew exactly where Log4j was to begin with? And so the question is, do that tabletop exercise. Hey, where do we have XYZ in our environment? And go chase it and just identify it. And try and reduce that time period it takes you to understand what your environment looks like. So we get back to basic asset management. And then what you learn, that's where you come to these kinds of groups and you talk to people and you share that information.
Thank you. And anyone?
Anything like Pat just said, any networking events that you do, if you're part of any cybersecurity collaboratives, if you're part of any business units. I know we're a member of HISAC as being part of the healthcare, so if you're part of any critical infrastructure organizations, that's a great place for you to exchange information. They normally will have a way for you to even anonymize what you're sharing if you need to share IOCs with others, because let's be honest, if it's hitting all file share software, it's only a matter of time before it goes to the next one. I mean, we see it with every attack that we have. If it's Fortinet that's getting attacked, it'll be Cisco next. So understanding that that pattern doesn't change, they just change their target.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move out of the incident area, and we're going to move. We know all of the common or the biggest risk in causing any incident is a human factor, right? We do phishing campaigns, and my boss was asking me, what's an acceptable percentage, right? Is 3% acceptable, 6%, 1%? I said, one employee. Yeah, exactly, right? So it's tough to answer that question, right? So let's go into the awareness training, because at the end of the day, our employees are vulnerable to various attacks, right? So what are the innovative approaches and technologies are being employed in security awareness programs? And how effective are they in reducing human-related security risk? And we'll start with you, Cindy. You're from Discover. We know what sensitive data you have, and that famous ad with the guy in the middle of the night with their khakis, right, talking to the Disco ad. Disco red. Okay, never mind. Okay.
Anyway,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
so being in banking industry, that means that there's a set of the compliance training that you have to complete, every year, right? So that's one way of raising security awareness, is that making employee to go through like interactive exercise or video like trainings to make sure that they play different scenarios and you know what to do. And then phishing campaigns is like given, pretty much. And, there's actually statistics in terms of like, hey, which department is doing worse, right? And being audit, like our leader always strives for 100% completion, right? Like if your auditors, you're still not aware of like, hey, what are the like telltale sign of being a phishing email, that's, kind of like, not great, right? So having a leaderboard to say, hey, what is your like click rate,
Right.
for each department, and making sure that your leader also reinforce that, will help to
Right.
get a little bit competition, Don't recommend public shaming, but
Do any of you are practicing any negative repercussions on if somebody fails phishing campaign multiple times within a year, or
So I don't think so, but like if our rate drop get too high with clickbait, and you will hear from our leaders.
okay, all right.
Well, so I'm going to avoid everything. We look for innovation, and I'm going to counter that again by saying, let's start balancing innovation with the fundamentals again. So for every one innovation we do, we probably ought to be doing 3 to 4 fundamental things and make sure we're doing those correctly first. I think for security awareness, we've missed the boat over the years because we bring people in the office and we say, here's how you must be secure in the office. Do this in the office. Do this in the office. Instead, what we should be, and that doesn't translate. What we should be doing is teaching them, how do you keep yourself and your family safe at home? How do you keep cyber safe when you're away from the office? Because those habits they'll bring with them to the office. Doesn't work the other way around.
Yep.
Show of hands, how many people actually enjoy the cybersecurity training that you have to do? Show of hands, how many people actually enjoy the cybersecurity that you have to do annually? And we're cybersecurity professionals. Our employees don't like it either. Part of the reason why they don't like it is because it's very repetitive. It's the same one every year. You're not telling me anything new. If you've been in this industry for a while, you've taken the same one or a similar one for the last 10 years. You can pretty much complete it with your eyes closed. The part that you have to be able to do with your employees is translate to them the why of why they're doing this training. It's not about the training, it's about understanding the behaviors behind it and understanding how this impacts them as an individual. Once you're able to translate that why on an employee level, what you wind up doing is actually entrenching in your culture within the organization a cybersecurity first mindset. And that's what you have to change. It doesn't necessarily happen with the trainings. It's about changing the culture of the org.
Wait a minute, Serena. I thought I was the only one that was skipping through all of that.
And it's very easy to do creative phishing and stuff like that. One of the very first ones I did at a company was I put out a phish inviting everybody to connect with me on LinkedIn. Well, who doesn't want to connect with the CISO on LinkedIn? And that's got to be a secure request, right? I got executives. I mean, we were like 30 or 40% click rate by that time. So. But what does that mean? Nothing.
No, yeah. All right. Okay. So I'm gonna make this a last question, and we're gonna open it up for public to ask questions to the panel. We'll start with you, Bez. Here. What are and we can't really close without asking this. And I'm sure you guys are going to bring the topic here. But emerging threats. What are the most significant emerging cybersecurity threat that you see in 24, 25, and what are you doing about it?
It's almost like when you go to a party and you can't say that one word or you lose the pin. If any of you have been to like a baby shower or bridal shower. But you guys can take my pins. I guess all of us can say AI, right? Or any form of artificial intelligence as we are learning generative AI, making sure our executives and everyone involved can understand what we mean when we say AI or any of the tools. So I think part of that is knowing, as much as we are looking at all the vendors here, there is a parallel that runs with ransomware groups or just bad actors or cyber criminals. They have their own format of, or forums really, where they go and try to find the latest encryption or the ransomware as a service tools that they're buying. So I think emergent threats are everything that we see that we think is going to do good. There's the other side of it that is going to be used for bad. So it's understanding what is evolving. So how do we make sure, as we're worried about the emerging threats of AI, how do we balance what Pat said of the fundamentals, right? We talk about a human factor. I really do think humans, we can be the last resort of the strength of the company, and I know we're seen as the weakest link, but it is also stands between me and clicking on a link that can bypass all technical controls, or I can know that every email I interact with, I'm the last line of defense. So I think understanding that, but also knowing it's going to be an AI-powered malicious campaign email that's going to look very believable. And so I think part of that is balancing, understand what the emergent threat is. I think AI is the easiest answer, but we also have, I just looked at SIM swapping. We've always been worried, recently, Jack Dorsey got the SIM swapped, and everybody was like, oh, now I have to go put a pin on my SIM, so now, someone doesn't take my SMS. But now there's an eSIM bypass. So I think it's all the things that are put into place, we look at it as a great thing that it's going to do, but we have to put in our process, or deploy in our process, all the great things that it's doing. How is this going to get bypassed, and am I ready for it, and can I detect it? I think that's part of the emerging thinking I want us to have, versus now. So I would say that.
I agree with you. I think that, I think AI-powered tool just reduce the obstacle of how sophisticated the attacker has to be, right? So those tools are readily available out there. So you are in this arms race to see who has a bigger and better tool to, on the attacker side as well as the defense side. And the other part is really the human element, like all of social engineering attacks about hey, if you give me your credentials, that just made the attacker much easier to get into your environment, circumvent all the controls of, parameter, basically.
Right.
So the human element is definitely something that we need to also be in robust controls against.
Yeah, thanks.
So I'd say I agree with that. It's the deep fake to me that's, because social engineering is going to be where the greatest impact of AI is going to play. And so deep fake, how many people are going to trust what they hear on the phone or what they see in a video? Or I have a friend that does AI stuff for a university up in Tulsa, and they took the chancellor giving a welcome message, and they used AI to create him speaking in 44 different native languages. And he's presenting in 44 different native languages. He doesn't speak any of them except English, and not even English that well. So, so that's going to be the hard one there too. The other really big threat, okay, I'm going to say it. We've all been drinking. We can get away with it. The SEC.
Yep.
The SEC. We're going to have secondary ransoms that occur as a result of the SEC ruling, because what's going to happen, and we've already seen it, the attacker's going to go, wait, I just looked at the public, the 8K or the 10K, and they didn't report that. They said it was only material, 4 days ago, but we've been in their system for the last 3 months. So what they do is they go make a report to the SEC if you don't pay them money to keep that quiet. And then the SEC is on a hunt. They are, in my opinion, popular or not, they are on a hunt to turn cyber folks into whistleblowers and to find some threshold cases that they can use. And what they'll do is somebody that comes in as a whistleblower, you tell us, you blow the whistle, and 90% of all the cases go to settlement. They never go to trial. So we get a $5 million settlement from your company because they didn't do the right thing on cyber, and we're going to cut you in for 10% of that, or whatever the case is. We're going to give you a fee, a commission on the fine because you were the whistleblower. That's where they're going.
That's a lot. I can't disagree with any of that, but the underlying issue that we still have to address, and it's going to continue to be our biggest threat, is complacency. We all get to a point where we get lulled into a sense of, I'm okay. And we stop continuously improving. We think our foundation is great. I don't have to look at it again. I bought this tool. I put it up. It's been running for 2 years. I don't have to touch it again. I don't know how many of you guys are old enough to remember infomercials in the middle of the night with Ron Popeil, but set it and forget it. That doesn't exist in cybersecurity. You have to continuously evolve. And until we get into a purpose of purposefully and intuitively and intentionally evolving our cybersecurity presence, we're always going to be our biggest risk.
Okay, so I think I do have a couple of questions. That is if folks up here don't have enough questions, so I'm going to give enough time for folks to ask questions. So does anyone have questions? And
Who has the courage to ask us a question?
exactly. And if you have questions, hold on till the mic comes to you. So, anyone?
This is for the panel in general. With some of the most recent very high-profile, high-loss deepfake attack that took place on the company in China, at what point, at what scale do we as cybersecurity professionals need to say this activity that we used to do on machines needs to move back into face-to-face because the attack vector doesn't scale well when you need to actually see someone? And as these attacks and deepfakes get so sophisticated, when do we need to draw the line and say, we cannot expect our users to differentiate?
So I mean, yes, there's going to have to be secondary controls put in place somehow. You know, when somebody sends you that email and says, or calls you on the phone and says, hey, send me this money, you know, I need you this many gift cards, or send this money to wherever it needs to go, change the wire or whatever, there's no reason that you shouldn't just automatically hang up and use the contact route that you're used to go make that person-to-person validation. It's gonna slow productivity, it's gonna slow the process, but I think that's the price we're gonna pay.
I have a question primarily for Pat. Right here, Pat. You said something earlier about $1 in profit with cybersecurity and all of that. I don't know if everybody knows, but FutureCon is all over the country, both virtual and physical. But the one here has a unique distinction that the others do not possess, and that is that it's very close to NSA and Annapolis Junction. If you look through this room, there are more cleared people here now than there are in this same room at a lot of other similar events. And cybersecurity is two very different things in the cleared and uncleared world, pursuant to your comment. You talked about it being a revenue positive. You made the illusion. I work in the uncleared world. I've been in the cleared world, but I work in the uncleared world now, and I can tell you confidently, they view development as revenue positive, testing, quality, and cybersecurity as revenue negative. The initiatives you all are talking about, you can do in the cleared world. In the uncleared world, you come up and say, well, why are we looking at what you said? Why are we looking at this regulation that's come out? Let's step back and make it better. Not in the uncleared world. You won't be there tomorrow. I promise you won't be there tomorrow. You're hoping you keep your job as it is. You can only have as much cybersecurity as people are willing to pay for. Now, the government's willing to pay for it because of presidential mandates. Can you, Pat, address the idea of differentiating between cybersecurity where you can't lose your job and one where it's revenue negative by definition?
So now you just jumped into the dark side, which I agreed to embrace years ago, and realized that all of us here are salespeople. And whether you like it or not, we're selling. And so it's all about relationship building and selling, and that sounds like maybe a rah-rah kind of answer, but it's not. If I have the appropriate relationship with my ELT and the appropriate relationship with my board, and they understand the risk of doing or not doing what's being recommended, then that's the best I can do. And frankly, if at that point, if I'm doing the right thing and I have to lose my job over it, then I guess I have to move somewhere else. I guess I have to go on to something else. And I don't mean that to sound flippant, but I'm going to do the right thing and report the right thing and tell them the right thing. And if they don't want me, then that means they're not willing to invest in it, and then it's time to move on. I don't have a better answer for you in that respect, but I do get your distinction between cleared and uncleared. And when I said that about $1 revenue, that really is conditioned on the appropriate business. You may not ever be able to do something like that in a B2C world necessarily. In a B2B world, you might have a better opportunity to do some things like that. My challenge is to start thinking beyond the traditional blocking and tackling and think about ways that you can change the narrative. Does that help?
I think, Serena, you have a thought on that.
I've never worked in the cleared world. I've only worked in the uncleared world. And what has gotten me the furthest is explaining the why. If you can explain why it's going to benefit the company overall, if in order for them to secure X amount of contracts, they have to have this compliance regulation, that in turn builds into the reason for why they need to put it in place. If it gets to a point where having the following regulations opens my business up into being able to go into this other income stream, into this other environment. Maybe I'm in banking and I want to do something in healthcare. Okay, now I need HIPAA. There's a different set of regulations and requirements that go along with that. Forming that partnership in the very beginning of building the why as to why it's important for the business, and understanding that cybersecurity is not supposed to be a blocker in any means. It's not supposed to be the department of no. It's supposed to be the department of, okay, let's build this better. It has to happen in the very beginning. It has to happen with the initial relationship building, whether it's with your IT department, whether it's with your CFO, depending on where cybersecurity or information security fits within your regulatory industry or in your organization. Start there and start explaining the why to those people who are closest to it, and you'll get a little bit better buy-in. It doesn't happen overnight. It's not always easy to do. And like I've had several people tell me in the past, if you're in a company that does not care about their cybersecurity posture, they're not going to be in business very long. They're eventually going to go out of business because they don't care.
Especially with the high price of liability to CISOs nowadays. CISOs are on the button for that, and I've talked to folks about D&O insurance and whether you're covered or not. I've dealt with companies asking for letters of indemnity, but they're hanging CISOs without hanging the CEO that actually signed off on the 10K as an example. So I don't think you have the option of doing anything other than the right thing unless you want to risk your freedom and money. So.
Agreed. Anybody else with any other questions?
So I have a slightly different perspective on that. Also being in the cleared world, there are ways to turn your cybersecurity spend into, well, less of a burden on your own budget, simply because at the same time you are handling all the logs for all of your stuff, you can use that to fulfill multiple requirements across multiple divisions and put them on the hook for, or redistribute budget that way. We found that to be a fairly successful strategy when it comes to lessening the burden, shall we say.
Okay.
Actually, that's an area that you may be able to partner with your audit, internal audit, to get the budget and the funding and the resource that you need, right? So given regulatory compliance risk, for example, right? If there's a new regulation coming in, there's these requirements and control that you need to implement. And by the way, internal audit looking to me and give me a bunch of critical high issues, right? So use that, right? And to escalate it to the board to say, hey, I need more resources, right? Because constantly I felt like it's underfunded, underbudgeted, and you just guys are still juggling with priority, right? And you just purely need more resource and people to do the work, and that's the idea. So when auditor come in and look at the area, tell them, hey, here's where I think the high risk is. I really need help. I don't have enough resource, right? So we can actually bubble it up to the board and say they really need help, right? So this is where the partnership can come in and say, let's help each other out, on this and highlight where the risk is and get you more money, more resource.
Thank you, Cindy. Any other thoughts?
Real
questions?
quick, Nish. While you're doing that, I was gonna add too. This is a great example of you can't just as a leader say, I don't have enough. That's never gonna sell. So you have to rationalize it somehow. So start looking at some tools that might help you do that. Maybe you look at things like Lean and you start going through A3s and working through 5 whys and doing all the things that come down that say the root cause is I don't have enough, instead of just saying I don't have enough.
So when you ask the question, who enjoys doing the awareness training? I enjoy it like I enjoy waking up on January 1st and looking at myself in the mirror and like stepping on the scale and saying, hey, I've got a long way to go. When I do the awareness training, and I've been in both the classified and classified worlds, my response to that training is this is never going to work to protect us against advanced persistent threat. It just simply isn't going to work. So it reminds me I need to engineer in resilience. I cannot rely on the users to keep a phishing attack from hitting my system. So how do I approach it instead? So, January 2, I'm looking for new ways to reinvent myself to do it better.
So there's a couple of different ways. Cybersecurity training is one of those things that it started out with great intentions. Everybody should take this. We all should know how to do this. But the reality is that it still doesn't really translate. So you build in your defense in depth. You put your users basically in a bubble. You bubble wrap them as best as you can. You make sure that you have things like smart link protection. You make sure that you have safe attachments. You put them in several layers before the email ever gets to them. You don't allow them to unquarantine their own emails. If it's important enough, they'll reach out to somebody and say, hey, I'm looking for an email. If they don't reach out, I'm not bothering to look at it. I'm not going to spend the time going through a quarantine list because everybody wants to send in spam and everybody wants to send in a sales email. If you need it, you'll reach out. If not, I'm going to bubble wrap my user as best as possible so that if they do click on a link, I get notified, it gets quarantined, their system automatically gets scanned, reviewed. It goes through a full level of our tier 1 and tier 2 analysts get involved, reach out to the user, say, hey, leave your computer on, we're scanning it. Nothing to be alarmed about, but we got an alert that you clicked on a link. They're usually very happy about it and very mystified that we even knew that they clicked on something. But bubble wrap your user because they are your first and last line of defense.
And let them know you're watching.
I do love it. It sounds to me like you may have read the book Extreme Ownership, because one of the things that we often do is ask the wrong question too. When somebody does something wrong, click the wrong link, instead of asking, why'd you do that? We should be asking ourselves, what didn't we teach you that you need to know? So that's an example of we need to flip the script and stop doing the same thing over and over again and thinking it's going to change the outcome.
Good point, definitely. Any other questions here? No? Then, Shalene, I'm going to end here. I'd like to thank all the panelists here. Thank you. Thank you.
guys again so much.
you're very welcome.
We really
Thank you.
appreciate you.